the neurosurgeon in the hospital. You clean toilets for a living, Khalil. So please stop pretending like you understand anything about medicine or patient care. That's not your job, and frankly, it's embarrassing watching you try to act like you know what you're talking about. Dr. Rebecca Foster's voice echoed down the empty third floor corridor of Providence Hospital at 2 a.m. as she dismissively waved away the Syrian night janitor who just tried to tell her that the elderly patient in room 347 was showing early signs of neurological distress that might indicate a stroke. I am a board-certified physician with 12 years of experience. That patient has already been examined by our neurology resident tonight and cleared for discharge tomorrow morning. I don't need a janitor who mops floors telling me how to practice medicine. Just stick to cleaning and leave the medical decisions to people who actually went to medical school. What Dr. Foster didn't know, what this arrogant American emergency physician was too busy asserting her medical authority to notice, was that the ignorant janitor who cleans toilets she just dismissed was actually Dr. Khalil Hassan, a board-certified neurosurgeon who'd performed over 500 brain surgeries during 15 years of practice at Damascus University Hospital in Syria. Specializing in the exact type of posterior circulation stroke, he'd just identified in a patient whose symptoms Dr. Foster and her colleagues had completely missed. Now reduced to mopping hospital floors in Rhode Island because the United States wouldn't recognize his Syrian medical credentials despite his expertise far exceeding most American neurosurgeons. And what Dr. Foster definitely didn't realize was that in approximately 40 minutes, that patient would suffer a massive brainstem stroke that would kill him unless someone intervened immediately with the specific neurological knowledge that only the toilet cleaner she'd just mocked possessed. And the only thing standing between that elderly man and death or permanent brain damage would be the Syrian refugee whose neurosurgical expertise Dr. Foster had spent months dismissing. With contemptuous ignorance, bro. You see, I was actually visiting my nephew Marcus at Providence Hospital that night. He'd been admitted 2 days earlier for emergency appendectomy, and I'd driven up from Connecticut to check on him since his parents were traveling overseas. I'd arrived around midnight, figuring hospitals never sleep anyway. And after spending time with Marcus, I'd been wandering the quiet third floor corridors around 2 a.m. when I'd witnessed that interaction between Dr. Foster and Khalil. And brother, after 40 years in security work, including plenty of time in medical facilities, I developed radar for recognizing when someone's current job doesn't match their actual capabilities. And the way Khalil had been assessing that patient through the room's window, the specific medical terminology he'd used when trying to warn Dr. Foster, the systematic nature of his observations, all suggested he understood neurology at a level that hospital janitors definitely don't learn from cleaning supplies, you know? Before I tell you how that patient's stroke crisis revealed that, the ignorant janitor Dr. Foster had mocked was actually more qualified to handle neurological emergencies than anyone else in that hospital. Let me take a moment here in my living room, because yeah, I'm telling you the story from home now. Got about a dozen folks here for Sunday family dinner, including my sister's kids and some of the neighborhood families whose children basically grew up in this house. Y'all settle in with your plates because this one's gonna take a while. And it's important. It's about a different kind of hidden expertise than those immigrant professional stories I usually tell. But it connects to something I'm going to share after about a man whose intelligence saved lives despite never having formal education at all. Now, if you'll pardon an old man for getting comfortable in his favorite chair while y'all finish your pot roast, stories about refugee doctors forced into janitorial work while their life-saving medical expertise goes to waste always hit me particularly hard. At my age, having worked security in hospitals, refugee resettlement centers, and everywhere displaced people try to rebuild lives after fleeing war zones, I've met countless Syrian, Iraqi, Afghan, and Yemeni physicians who clean toilets or drive taxis because American medical licensing systems make it virtually impossible for foreign doctors to practice, even when they performed surgeries and saved lives under conditions that would break most American physicians. Thank you for staying with Uncle Sam, and y'all kids can keep playing with your toys over there. But listen to this story because it teaches something important about not judging people by their current jobs. As I tell you about one of the most dramatic demonstrations I ever witnessed of why assuming janitors are uneducated can literally cost lives when medical emergencies emerge that only refugee doctors have expertise to recognize. To understand how Dr. Khalil Hassan ended up mopping hospital floors in Providence, despite being one of Syria's most accomplished neurosurgeons. We got to go back about 8 years to when ISIS's advance on Damascus made continuing his neurosurgical practice impossible. And staying in Syria meant almost certain death for him and his family. Khalil had been born in Damascus in 1977, growing up in Syria during a period of relative stability before the civil war tore the country apart. His father had been a pharmacist, his mother a teacher, and Khalil had been drawn to medicine from childhood, specifically to neurosurgery, the most demanding and precise of all medical specialties, requiring exceptional spatial reasoning, steady hands, ability to make split-second decisions during brain operations, where millimeters determined whether patients lived or died. I loved the challenge of neurosurgery, Khalil had told me during our conversation after the stroke emergency. Working inside someone's brain, removing tumors without damaging critical areas, repairing blood vessels to prevent strokes, operating on the most complex organ in the human body. Neurosurgery requires perfect combination of knowledge, skill, and composure under pressure. One mistake during brain surgery and patient dies on table or wakes up paralyzed. That responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. Khalil's medical education had been completed at Damascus University, one of the Middle East's premier medical schools, where he'd earned his medical degree and then completed 7 additional years of neurosurgical residency and fellowship training. His specialization had been in cerebrovascular neurosurgery, the complex field of operating on brain aneurysms, strokes, and vascular malformations that could cause catastrophic brain bleeds or strokes if not treated surgically. By 2012, at age 35, Khalil had been practicing neurosurgery for 10 years at Damascus University Hospital, one of Syria's largest medical centers. He'd performed over 500 brain surgeries, many under extremely difficult conditions as Syria's civil war had made practicing medicine increasingly dangerous. His expertise in stroke recognition and treatment had made him particularly valuable. He could identify subtle signs of impending strokes that other physicians missed, and his surgical skills allowed him to intervene before catastrophic brain damage occurred. I specialized in posterior circulation strokes, Khalil had explained. These are strokes affecting the back of the brainstem, cerebellum, areas that control basic life functions like breathing and consciousness. They're much harder to recognize than typical strokes because symptoms are subtle and different. Many doctors miss them until it's too late, and patient has massive brainstem stroke that's usually fatal or leaves them permanently disabled. I'd trained specifically to catch these early signs and intervene surgically before catastrophic damage. Khalil's neurosurgical work had been internationally recognized. He'd published research in medical journals, presented at neurosurgery conferences, trained younger Syrian neurosurgeons in advanced techniques. By Middle Eastern medical standards, he'd achieved the kind of professional success that typically meant stable career and respect in the medical community. But Syria's civil war had made Damascus increasingly dangerous for medical professionals. By 2015, ISIS and other militant groups had been targeting doctors, demanding they treat wounded fighters without reporting to authorities, sometimes executing physicians who refused to participate in torture or who treated enemy soldiers. Damascus University Hospital had been caught in crossfire multiple times. Medical staff had been kidnapped and several of Khalil's colleagues had been killed. The breaking point came in early 2016, Khalil had recalled, his voice carrying the trauma of those memories. ISIS fighters brought wounded member to hospital, demanded immediate surgery, threatened to kill medical staff if we reported them or a patient died. I had to perform brain surgery on terrorists while armed men stood in my operating room threatening to shoot me if anything went wrong. After that surgery, they said I was now their doctor, and they killed my wife and daughters if I ever refused to treat their fighters or if I reported them to authorities. I made a decision that night that we had to leave Syria, Khalil had continued. If I stayed, I'd either become complicit with ISIS by treating their fighters or I'd be killed along with my family for refusing. My wife Amira and our 3 daughters, ages 12, 9, and 6, we left Damascus within a week with almost nothing. Just some clothes, copies of my medical credentials, and the hope that maybe somewhere else would let me practice neurosurgery again. Khalil and his family had fled Syria through Turkey, eventually entering the United States through the refugee resettlement program in late 2016. They'd been resettled in Providence, Rhode Island, where a small Syrian community existed, and surgery, threatened to kill medical staff if we reported them or a patient died. I had to perform brain surgery on terrorists while armed men stood in my operating room threatening to shoot me if anything went wrong. After that surgery, they said I was now their doctor, and they'd kill my wife and daughters if I ever refused to treat their fighters or if I reported them to authorities. I made decision that night that we had to leave Syria, Khalil had continued. If I stayed, I'd either become complicit with ISIS by treating their fighters or I'd be killed along with my family for refusing. My wife Amira and our 3 daughters, ages 12, 9, and 6, we left Damascus within a week with almost nothing. Just some clothes, copies of my medical credentials, and the hope that maybe somewhere else would let me practice neurosurgery again. Khalil and his family had fled Syria through Turkey, eventually entering the United States through the refugee resettlement program in late 2016. They'd been resettled in Providence, Rhode Island, where a small Syrian community existed, and refugee services could help them adjust. Their refugee status gave them legal authorization to work. But what Khalil discovered was that the United States medical licensing system made it virtually impossible for foreign-trained physicians to practice, even fleeing war zones with documented expertise. I have medical degree from Damascus University. I'm board-certified neurosurgeon in Syria. I have 15 years of practice, including 500 brain surgeries, Khalil had explained. But in the United States, my medical degree isn't recognized. I need to repeat medical residency. 4 years of internal medicine plus 5 years of neurosurgery, 9 years total, starting over as if I'd never practiced medicine. Then licensing exams costing thousands of dollars. The entire process takes over a decade, and I can't earn doctor's salary during that time. Even getting into residency programs requires passing USMLE exams that cost over $5,000 just for testing fees, Khalil had continued. I needed to support my family immediately. Rent in Providence was expensive. My daughters needed school supplies. We had no savings after fleeing Syria. I couldn't afford to spend years studying for exams and doing unpaid residency when I'd already done all that training and had 15 years of neurosurgical experience. Khalil had tried desperately to find any medical work that didn't require full physician licensing, medical assistant, hospital technician, anything that would let him use his medical knowledge. But even those positions preferred American credentials and raised questions about why someone claiming to be a neurosurgeon would accept technician wages. The only job available that would hire him immediately and pay enough to support his family had been night shift janitorial work at Providence Hospital. So Dr. Khalil Hassan, board-certified neurosurgeon who'd performed 500 brain surgeries, became Khalil the night janitor who cleaned toilets and mopped floors, Khalil had told me. Every night I'd work my cleaning shift in the same hospital where I should have been practicing neurosurgery, watching American doctors make medical decisions, seeing patients, doing work I was trained for but couldn't legally do. The psychological pain of that was almost worse than physical danger I'd faced in Syria. The devastation of that transition had been profound. Khalil would work his janitorial shifts overnight, then return to his small apartment and study neurosurgery journals to maintain his medical knowledge. He practiced neurological examination techniques on his daughters, keeping his diagnostic skills sharp. He'd watch American physicians treat patients and want desperately to contribute his expertise, but revealing his neurosurgical background would raise questions about why a brain surgeon was cleaning toilets. Questions that might expose how broken the medical licensing system was, or that might cost him the only job he could get. The hardest part wasn't the janitorial work itself, Halia had explained. Manual labor is honest work, nothing shameful about it. The hard part was having expertise to save lives and watching patients suffer or die from neurological conditions I could have treated while I couldn't say anything. Because nobody would believe that a hospital janitor understood neurosurgery. I watched several patients have strokes over the years that I'd recognized early signs of, but I stayed silent because speaking up would just get me fired or mocked. I'd been visiting my nephew Marcus at Providence Hospital for the second night. He was recovering well from his appendectomy and would be discharged the next day. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I'd been wandering the quiet third-floor corridors, unable to sleep in the uncomfortable visitor chair in Marcus's room, when I first noticed Khalil working his janitorial rounds. What had caught my attention was the way Khalil moved through the hospital, not like typical janitorial staff focused purely on cleaning tasks, but with constant medical awareness. He'd glance into patient rooms, his eyes assessing their conditions. He'd notice monitors and equipment with the attention of someone who understood what the displays meant. He positioned himself where he could observe medical staff interactions with patients, as if he was still practicing medicine mentally, even though his job was to empty trash cans. The patient in room 347 was an elderly man named George Patterson, 78 years old, who'd been admitted earlier that day with complaints of dizziness and mild confusion. The neurology resident had examined him, found nothing definitive, and planned to discharge him the next morning. But when I'd walked past room 347 around 1:45 a.m., I'd seen Khalil pause outside the room, watching Mr. Patterson through the window with focused medical attention that seemed unusual for a janitor. A few minutes later, when Dr. Rebecca Foster had been making her rounds checking overnight patients, Khalil had approached her near the nurse's station with obvious concern about Mr. Patterson. That's when I'd witnessed the dismissive interaction that started this story. Dr. Foster essentially telling Khalil that janitors don't get to question physician decisions. Dr. Foster, please. Khalil had tried one more time after her initial dismissal. I know this is not my place, but I really think patient in 347 is showing signs of posterior circulation stroke. The way his eyes are moving, the subtle balance problems, the confusion, these are classic early signs of cerebellar ischemia. If this is not evaluated immediately, he will have massive stroke. You write that? It's not your place, Dr. Foster had replied with contempt. You're a janitor, you clean toilets, you don't diagnose strokes. That patient was already evaluated by our neurology resident, who actually went to medical school and knows what stroke symptoms look like. Now please let me do my job and you do yours, which is mopping floors, not playing doctor. Khalil had walked away with quiet dignity, returning to his cleaning cart while Dr. Foster had moved on to check other patients. I'd watched this interaction feeling both angry at Dr. Foster's condescension and curious about why Khalil had such specific medical knowledge. Terms like posterior circulation stroke and brainstem ischemia aren't things that hospital janitors typically know. I'd followed Khalil down the corridor once Dr. Foster had left. Excuse me, I couldn't help overhearing that exchange. You clearly know medical terminology? Do you have healthcare background? Khalil had hesitated, looking uncertain about whether to reveal his history. In my country, I was doctor, neurosurgeon, actually. 15 years of practice in Damascus before I had to flee ISIS. But here in America, my medical credentials are not recognized. I work as janitor while trying to figure out if I can ever practice neurosurgery again. Probably not possible. System is designed to prevent foreign doctors from practicing, even if we have more experience than American doctors. And that patient you tried to warn Dr. Foster about, I'd asked. He is having posterior circulation stroke, Khalil had said with certainty. I've seen these signs hundreds of times. It's my specialty. The subtle eye movement abnormalities, the mild ataxia when he tries to sit up, the confusion that seems like just being elderly, but is actually altered consciousness from brainstem ischemia. If he is not treated within the next few hours, he will have massive stroke affecting his brainstem. That is usually fatal or leaves patient in locked-in state, conscious, but completely paralyzed. But Dr. Foster thinks I'm just stupid janitor who doesn't understand medicine. Is there anything you can do? I'd asked. Not legally, Khalil had replied with. Frustration. I'm not licensed physician here. If I try to treat patient and something goes wrong, I go to jail for practicing medicine without license. But if I don't do anything and he has massive stroke and dies, I'll know I could have prevented it. Either way, I lose. That's what it means to be a refugee doctor in America, having expertise to save lives but being legally prohibited from using it. For the next 30 minutes, Khalil had continued his janitorial work while keeping close watch on room 347 through the corridor windows. I'd stayed nearby, partly because I was now invested in this patient's welfare, and partly because I had a feeling the situation was going to escalate in a way that would prove Khalil's medical judgment was correct. Around 2:25 a.m., Mr. Patterson had pressed his call button. A nurse had responded, and through the open door I'd heard Mr. Patterson saying he felt strange, dizzy, confused, having trouble moving his left side. The nurse had checked his vital signs, found everything normal according to the monitors, and told him she'd let the doctor know, but that he should try to rest. He's progressing, Khalil had said quietly, watching from the corridor. The stroke is advancing. Those symptoms, unilateral weakness, worsening dizziness, mean the ischemia is spreading in his brainstem. He has maybe 30 to 40 minutes before it becomes catastrophic. After that, Even emergency surgery might not save him. Should we try Dr. Foster again? I suggested. She will not listen to Janitor, Khalil had replied. I already tried. She made it very clear that I should stick to cleaning toilets and not pretend to understand medicine. But maybe you could talk to her. Tell her that patient's condition is changing, that he needs immediate CT scan and neurological evaluation. I found Dr. Foster at the nurse's station reviewing charts. Excuse me, doctor, I'm visiting my nephew on this floor and I noticed the patient in 347 seems to be getting worse. He's complaining of weakness and dizziness, and the janitor mentioned he might be having a stroke. The janitor? Dr. Foster had looked up with annoyed recognition. Is he still going around telling people that patient has a stroke? I already told him that's not his job. Look, I appreciate your concern for your fellow patients, but that man was evaluated by neurology this evening. His symptoms are consistent with benign positional vertigo, basically inner ear problems that cause dizziness in elderly patients. It's not a stroke. The janitor has no medical training and needs to stop spreading alarm. But what if he's right? I pressed. Khalil seems to know a lot about neurology. He mentioned something about posterior circulation stroke and brainstem. Ischemia, those sound like specific medical terms that suggest he has some medical background. I don't care if the janitor can recite medical terminology, Dr. Foster had replied dismissively. Maybe he watches Grey's Anatomy or looks things up on Wikipedia. But what happened about 15 minutes later would force Dr. Foster to confront exactly how wrong she'd been about the janitor who cleans toilets, and his supposed lack of medical knowledge. At 2:42 a.m., alarms had started sounding from room 347. Mr. Patterson's heart rate monitor was showing dangerous irregularities. His blood pressure had dropped suddenly, and the automated alerts had brought nurses and Dr. Foster running to his room. What they'd found was a patient in acute medical crisis, Mr. Patterson barely conscious, unable to speak or move most of his body, showing classic signs of massive brainstem stroke, exactly as Khalil had predicted would happen if he wasn't treated immediately. We need to intubate him, Dr. Foster had shouted, recognizing the severity but not initially understanding what had caused it. His airway is compromised. Get respiratory therapy here now. And page neurology. Something's seriously wrong. The hospital's overnight neurology attending had been called, but he was covering 3 hospitals and was currently 40 minutes away at another facility. Respiratory therapy was bringing intubation equipment, but Mr. Patterson's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His consciousness fading, his brain swelling from the massive stroke, his prognosis becoming worse with every minute that passed without proper neurological intervention. That's when Khalil had appeared in the doorway of room 347. No longer able to stand by watching a patient die from a condition. He predicted and could have prevented if anyone had listened to the janitor who cleans toilets. He's having basilar artery stroke, Khalil had said with calm medical authority. Massive posterior circulation ischemia affecting brainstem. I told you this was going to happen. He needs immediate CT angiogram to confirm. Then either IV thrombolytics if we're still in the window, or emergency mechanical thrombectomy to remove the clot. If you don't intervene in the next 20 minutes, he will either die or survive in locked-in state. How do you know that? Dr. Foster had snapped, but her voice had carried more desperation than contempt now. Who are you? I'm neurosurgeon, Khalil had replied simply. Board certified in Syria, 15 years of practice at Damascus University Hospital, over 500 brain surgeries, including many stroke interventions. I specialize in posterior circulation strokes. This is exactly what I tried to warn you about 2 hours ago, when you told me I was just janitor who should stick to cleaning toilets. Now this patient is dying from condition I could have prevented if you'd listened to me. The recognition on Dr. Foster's, the dawning horror of realizing she dismissed critical medical warnings from someone more qualified than she was, had been obvious even in the crisis moment. But there was no time for apologies or recriminations. Mr. Patterson was dying, the neurology attending was still 35 minutes away, and the only person present who understood exactly what was happening and how to treat it was the Syrian refugee whose expertise Dr. Foster had spent months mocking. Can you help him? Dr. Foster had asked, professional pride completely abandoned in the face of her patient's imminent death. Legally, I'm not allowed to, Khalil had replied. I'm not licensed physician here. If I practice medicine and something goes wrong, I go to prison. But if I do nothing, he dies from preventable condition. So I will tell you what to do and you will do it, and we will not discuss my role afterward. For the next 40 minutes, until the neurology attending had finally arrived, Khalil had essentially directed Mr. Patterson's emergency treatment while officially being just the janitor. He'd guided Dr. Foster through the diagnostic process, explained the specific ET imaging protocols needed to visualize posterior circulation stroke, interpreted the scan results that showed the massive basilar artery clot, and outlined the emergency treatment options available. He's outside the window for 4 thrombolytics, Khalil had explained while reviewing the CT scans on the nursing station computer. Stroke has been progressing for at least 3 hours now. His only chance is mechanical thrombectomy, catheter insertion through femoral artery. Navigate up to basilar artery. Physically remove the clot. But neurology attending needs to get here immediately because every minute delay means more brain tissue death. Can you do the procedure? Dr. Foster had asked, recognizing that Khalil's expertise exceeded anyone else currently available. I've done many thrombectomies, Khalil had confirmed, but I cannot do it legally here. I'm not licensed. I don't have hospital privileges. If anything went wrong, I'd be criminally prosecuted. Your neurology attending needs to perform procedure. I can guide him through it. If he has not experience with posterior circulation interventions, but it has to be his hands on the catheter. The neurology attending, Dr. Michael Chin, had arrived around 3:25 a.m. and had been briefed on the situation. His reaction to learning that the diagnostic workup had been essentially directed by a hospital janitor had been shocked disbelief. But Mr. Patterson's critical condition had overridden any concerns about proper medical hierarchy. You're telling me that our night janitor is a neurosurgeon who identified this posterior circulation stroke hours before anyone else recognized it? Dr. Chen had asked while scrubbing for the emergency thrombectomy procedure. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Dr. Foster had confirmed, her shame evident. He tried to warn me at 2 a.m. that the patient was showing early signs of brainstem stroke. I dismissed him, told him he was just a janitor who should stick to cleaning toilets. If I'd listened to him, we could have started treatment hours ago before the stroke became massive. Now, we'd be doing emergency intervention that might not work because I was too arrogant to listen to someone with more expertise than me. The mechanical thrombectomy had been performed with Khalil observing from the procedure room and quietly providing guidance to Dr. Chin about the specific techniques needed for basilar artery interventions. Khalil's input had been invaluable. His experience with posterior circulation strokes far exceeded Dr. Chen's, and his calm expertise had guided the procedure through several critical moments where Dr. Chen had been uncertain about next steps. Advance catheter slowly. Basilar artery is delicate and any perforation is fatal. Khalil had coached from the corner where he'd been standing in his janitor's uniform, watching the fluoroscopy screens. When you reach the clot, use gentle suction first. If that doesn't work, then stent retriever. These clots are usually fibrin-rich and respond better to mechanical removal than thrombolytics. The procedure had taken 90 minutes, but ultimately had been successful. Dr. Chen had removed the massive clot from Mr. Patterson's basilar artery, restoring blood flow to his brainstem. Mr. Patterson's neurological status had begun improving within minutes, his consciousness returning, his ability to move coming back. The catastrophic trajectory reversed by the successful intervention that Khalil, early warning, and diagnostic guidance had made possible. He's going to survive, Dr. Chun had announced after completing the procedure. Significant stroke damage to cerebellum and parts of brainstem, but blood flow is restored. He'll need months of rehabilitation, but he should recover most function. If we'd waited even another hour, he would have died or been in persistent vegetative state. He would have died 2 hours ago if this situation had been properly handled, Khalil had said quietly. I identified stroke signs at 2 a.m. If treatment had started then, he would have avoided most of this brain damage. Instead, patient now has permanent disability because doctor decided that janitor couldn't possibly understand neurology. The aftermath of that night had been complex and uncomfortable for everyone involved. Mr. Patterson had survived and eventually recovered enough function to live independently, though with some permanent neurological deficits from the delayed treatment. The hospital administration had launched an investigation into how a critical stroke diagnosis had been missed by medical staff, but identified by a janitor. And Dr. Rebecca Foster had been forced to confront that her dismissal of Khalil's warnings had nearly killed a patient and had caused permanent harm that could have been prevented. Dr. Hassan, Foster had approached Khalil the next evening during his janitorial shift, her voice carrying genuine contrition. I need to apologize. I was wrong, catastrophically wrong, about everything. You tried to save Mr. Patterson, and I dismissed you because of my own arrogance and prejudice. You were more qualified than me to recognize that stroke, and my refusal to listen nearly killed him. Apology noted, Khalil had replied, though his voice had carried the weariness of someone who did receive similar apologies after his expertise had been proven, never before when it might have prevented harm. But understand that this happens constantly to refugee doctors. We're trained physicians with years of experience, but Americans see us in janitorial or taxi jobs and assume we're uneducated. You spent months mocking me, telling me to stick to cleaning toilets, dismissing my medical knowledge. You only recognized my value after I saved patient Beth's life, despite you trying to prevent me from helping. I know, Foster had acknowledged, and I don't have any excuse. I let my assumptions about janitors and foreign doctors override my medical judgment. That's inexcusable for a physician. But I want to do something meaningful to make this right, both for you personally and to prevent this from happening to other refugee medical professionals. Dr. Foster had proven genuine in that commitment. She personally funded Khalil as medical licensing exam preparation. Khalil's medical licensing journey had been accelerated with the support he'd received. Within 18 months of the stroke rescue, he'd passed all required USMLE exams, completed supervised clinical practice through the refugee physician program, and received his Rhode Island medical license. Rather than requiring him to repeat 9 years of residency, the reformed pathway had recognized his 15 years of Syrian neurosurgical practice as equivalent experience. Getting my medical license back felt like reclaiming my identity. Khalil had told me during a phone conversation after his licensing approval. For 6 years, I'd been Khalil the janitor who Americans assumed was uneducated. My daughters had watched their father clean toilets despite being neurosurgeon. Now, I could practice medicine again, be the doctor Dee spent 22 years becoming through education and practice in Syria. Khalil had been hired by Providence Hospital as attending neurosurgeon, bringing his 15-plus years of experience to treating patients with brain tumors, aneurysms, strokes, and other neurological conditions requiring surgical intervention. His expertise in posterior circulation strokes, the exact type of stroke he'd identified in Mr. Patterson, had made him particularly valuable to a hospital that served a large elderly population at high risk for cerebrovascular disease. Dr. Hassan is extraordinary. Providence Hospital's neurology department chief had commented during a performance review. His diagnostic skills are exceptional. He catches subtle neurological signs that other physicians miss. His surgical technique is impeccable, refined through hundreds of procedures performed under extremely difficult conditions in Damascus. And his ability to remain calm during complex brain surgeries is exactly what neurosurgery requires. We're fortunate Rhode Island reformed its licensing process enough to recognize his expertise, because he's the kind of neurosurgeon every hospital desperately needs. That assessment had validated what Khalil had always known, that his Syrian medical education in Damascus hospital experience had made him a highly skilled neurosurgeon whose capabilities matched or exceeded American standards. The 6 years he'd spent cleaning hospital toilets hadn't been because he lacked medical expertise. They'd been because systematic barriers assumed foreign medical credentials were automatically inferior, and because refugee circumstances made navigating impossible licensing requirements even more insurmountable. Mr. Patterson had made a significant recovery, eventually regaining most of his neurological function after months of intensive rehabilitation. He'd become close friends with Khalil, visiting him regularly and publicly crediting the janitor who saved my life when the doctors missed my stroke. Patterson had also become an advocate for refugee physician recognition, speaking at licensing board hearings about how Khalil's expertise had saved him. If Dr. Foster had listened to Khalil that night, I wouldn't have the permanent disabilities I now have, Patterson had explained during one hearing. The delay in treatment caused brain damage that could have been prevented. But I am alive and mostly functional because a Syrian neurosurgeon working as a janitor recognized my stroke symptoms and refused to let me die despite being mocked and dismissed by American physicians who assumed he was too stupid to understand medicine. That experience taught me something profound about assumptions and prejudice. Patterson had continued. We see someone cleaning floors and we assume they're uneducated. We hear an accent and we assume someone doesn't understand complex concepts. We judge people by their current circumstances without knowing what they fled, what they sacrificed, what expertise they possessed that our systems refuse to recognize. Khalil is one of the most brilliant physicians I've ever encountered. And he was cleaning toilets while I almost died because nobody would listen to him. Dr. Rebecca Foster had undergone a genuine transformation after the incident, becoming an outspoken advocate for respecting refugee medical professionals and reforming physician licensing barriers. She'd written extensively about her experience, using her mistake as a teaching example about the dangers of assuming service workers lack expertise. I spent 6 months working alongside Dr. Hassan while he cleaned toilets. Foster had written a widely shared medical journal article. I watched him work every night, noticed how he observed patients, saw him trying to offer medical input that I dismissed as ignorant janitor pretending to understand medicine. I was so convinced that someone in a janitorial uniform couldn't possibly have medical knowledge that I ignored clear warnings about a patient as impending stroke. My prejudice nearly killed Mr. Patterson, Foster had continued in her article. It caused him permanent brain damage. It prevented life-saving treatment for hours while Khalil tried desperately to get anyone to listen to him. And when the stroke finally became massive and undeniable, I had to beg the ignorant janitor I mocked to save my patient's life. Using neurosurgical expertise that far exceeded mine, every physician should ask themselves, would you listen to medical warnings from your hospital guest janitor? Foster had concluded. Or would you assume, like I did, that their current job means they couldn't possibly understand medicine? Because refugee physicians are everywhere in our hospitals, cleaning rooms, delivering food, working jobs far beneath their expertise while our licensing systems prevent them from practicing. And sometimes those ignorant janitors might be the only people who can save your patient. That's life if you just overcome your prejudice enough to listen. Khalil's family had flourished in Rhode Island after his medical credential recognition. His wife Amira had found work as a translator helping other Syrian refugees navigate American systems. His 3 daughters, now ages 20, 17, and 14, had excelled academically, with his oldest daughter pursuing pre-med at Brown University. Inspired by watching her father rebuild his medical career, despite impossible obstacles, Khalil had made sure his daughters understood the full journey. The successful neurosurgical practice in Damascus, the ISIS threats that forced them to flee Syria, the 6 years of cleaning hospital toilets while being treated as uneducated, the stroke crisis that finally revealed his expertise. He wanted them to understand both the cost of maintaining professional integrity and the importance of never judging people by their current circumstances. I want my daughters to know that refugees are not charity cases or burdens, Khalil had explained to me. We are professionals, educated people, skilled workers who lost everything fleeing violence. I was a successful neurosurgeon before ISIS. I didn't come to America seeking better life. I came seeking safety so my family wouldn't be killed. The 6 years cleaning toilets were not because I was unqualified, but because American systems refused to recognize that a Syrian doctor could possibly be as competent as American physician. I also want them to understand the cost of refugee experience. Khalil had added, people see us now, me as neurosurgeon again, my wife working professionally, my daughters thriving in school and think we've made it. But they don't see the trauma we carry, fleeing Damascus with ISIS at our backs. Years of poverty and humiliation working janitorial jobs. Watching patients die from conditions I could have treated if anyone would listen to me. That psychological cost doesn't disappear just because I finally got my medical license back. We carry those scars forever. 2 years after the stroke rescue, Khalil had been promoted to chief of cerebrovascular neurosurgery at Providence Hospital, specializing in stroke prevention and treatment. He'd also become a prominent voice advocating for physician licensing reform and recognition of international medical education. He testified at licensing board hearings, spoken at medical conferences about his experience, and pushed for policies that would allow refugee physicians to practice while completing American credentialing requirements. There are thousands of refugee physicians in the United States working as janitors, taxi drivers, or other survival jobs because our licensing systems won't recognize their medical credentials. Khalil had explained during testimony before a congressional committee on healthcare workforce issues. We're not asking for shortcuts or special treatment. We're asking that our medical education and clinical experience be evaluated fairly rather than automatically rejected. Because we trained in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan, I proved my competence by diagnosing a stroke that American physicians missed, by guiding emergency treatment that saved a patient's life, by demonstrating neurosurgical knowledge that exceeded the neurology attending's expertise. Khalil had continued in his testimony. I passed the same medical licensing exams that American doctors take. I demonstrated my surgical skills through supervised practice. That's legitimate quality assurance, evaluating actual competence rather than just dismissing foreign credentials. But requiring refugee physicians to repeat decade-long residencies despite years of clinical experience, that patient protection, that's protectionism that wastes expertise while Americans die from physician shortages, Khalil had concluded. Mr. Patterson almost died because the system prevented me from practicing medicine. How many other Americans have died from preventable conditions because refugee doctors weren't allowed to use their expertise? That is the cost of licensing barriers that value protecting American physicians from competition over actually serving patients. Now, sitting here in my living room telling y'all this story while the kids play with their toys and the adults finish their Sunday dinner. I see a lot of you nodding because you recognize these patterns. Some of you have probably met people like Khalil, immigrants or refugees working jobs that seem beneath them. And you wondered about their stories but never asked. Or maybe you've been that person qualified for something better but stuck in survival work. Because systems won't recognize your expertise or give you a chance to prove yourself. And that brings me to something important I want to talk about. Because not all hidden expertise comes from professional credentials or medical degrees. Sometimes it's just intelligence. Practical, street smart, learned by necessity. Intelligence that life teaches people who never got the chance to go to college, but who develop skills that can save lives. Just as surely as any doctor's knowledge. Before I tell you about what happened at that corporate dinner party in Denver a few months ago. And yeah, I'm switching stories here because they connect in important ways. Let me ask you young folks listening. Do you think someone needs a college degree to be intelligent? To be valuable? To know things that can save lives? My youngest nephew, that's you, Marcus, still recovering over there. You're going to go to college next year, and that's great. Your parents have the means to send you. You've got the grades. You've earned that opportunity. But not everyone gets that chance, bro. Some people are just as smart, just as capable. But life circumstances mean they never got to walk across a graduation stage. And sometimes those people develop expertise that no diploma can teach. Survival intelligence, practical knowledge, skills learned from necessity rather than classrooms. The story I'm about to tell you is different from Khalil's in some important ways. It's not about a refugee doctor with 15 years of medical training. It's about a woman named Jennifer who never went to college at all, who married young to a man who turned out to be abusive, who everyone is stupid because she was quiet and seemed intimidated by her husband. But what they didn't know, what I didn't know until that night in Denver, was that Jennifer had been methodically documenting every instance of her husband as abuse with intelligence that would impress FBI investigators. building a case against him while everyone thought she was too scared and dumb to leave. Now, this next part gets into serious territory, domestic violence, which is something that affects millions of families and leaves scars that last lifetimes. I'm going to tell this story carefully because I know some of you all might have experienced abuse or know someone who has, and I want to be respectful of that trauma. If this topic is too difficult for you right now, that's completely understandable. Maybe step outside with the kids for a bit, or we can talk about something else. But if you stay, I am going to now tell you how someone everyone underestimated used incredible intelligence to escape a dangerous situation and save her own life. And the young ones playing over there, this part of the story has some grown-up topics about people hurting each other. So maybe this is a good time for y'all to go watch TV in the other room with your tablets. Uncle Sam's gonna talk about serious stuff for a bit. Okay, go on now. We'll call you back when we're talking about happier things. Kids, leave the room. All right. Now that the little ones are occupied, here's what I witnessed at that Denver corporate dinner party about 4 months ago. Aviso sensible. Tio Sam fala directamente. Before I get into the details, I need to be clear about something. We're about to talk about domestic violence, about a husband who abused his wife physically, emotionally, and psychologically over years of marriage. I'm going to use respectful language. I'm not going to describe the violence graphically. But I need to be honest about what happened because Jennifer is intelligent at escaping that. Situation might help someone listening who is in a similar place. If you're currently in an abusive relationship, or if you've survived one, please know that nothing I'm about to say is judgment about why people stay or how they leave. Every situation is different. Every person's safety considerations are unique. Jennifer's story is about how she got out. It's not a prescription for how everyone should handle abuse. And if you need help, please reach out to professionals, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. IS 1-800-799-7233. They're available 24/7, and they can connect you with resources in your area. Okay, here's what happened in Denver, ... I'd been hired to provide security consultation for a high-end restaurant in downtown Denver place called the Capitol Grill, where corporate types took clients for expensive dinners. My job was to assess their security protocols, emergency response systems, how they handled difficult situations. So I'd been there for about a week, observing different dinner services, when I witnessed what initially looked like a typical corporate dinner party, 3 couples celebrating someone's promotion. Expensive wine flowing, the kind of event these restaurants hosted constantly. But something had been off about one of the couples from the moment they'd arrived. The husband, I later learned his name was Marcus Brennan, had been controlling and dismissive toward his wife, Jennifer, from the start. Correcting how she greeted people, criticizing her appearance, making little comments that seemed designed to humiliate her in front of the group. And Jennifer had been quiet, almost withdrawn, seeming to shrink herself to avoid triggering her husband's obvious anger. The interaction that had really caught my attention happened about 30 minutes into their dinner. Jennifer had been setting the table with silverware and glasses, trying to arrange everything properly for their guests. Marcus had watched her for a moment, then his face had darkened with anger. "You're so stupid, Jennifer." Marcus's voice had carried across the private dining room, loud enough that I heard it from my position near the bar area where I'd been observing. "I've told you 3 times already how I want the table set for our guests, and you still can't get it right. Are you brain damaged or just naturally incompetent?" He'd grabbed her wrist, hard. I'd noticed the way Jennifer had winced and forced her to rearrange the silverware placement. The other 2 couples had looked uncomfortable but hadn't intervened. The common dynamic where people witness abuse but don't want the confrontation that comes with calling it out. "I'm sorry," Jennifer had said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I'm trying to get it right. Trying isn't good enough." Marcus had snapped. "Honestly, I don't know why I even bring you to these dinners. You embarrass me constantly with your stupidity. Can't follow simple instructions. Can't hold an intelligent conversation. Can't do anything right." You're lucky I'm patient enough to put up with your incompetence. Felt my blood pressure rising watching this. After 40 years in security, including plenty of domestic disturbance calls, I recognized abuse when I saw it. This wasn't a husband having a bad day or a couple arguing. This was systematic degradation designed to destroy someone's sense of worth and keep them controlled through constant humiliation. The dinner had continued with Marcus belittling Jennifer throughout, mocking things she said, correcting her grammar, making jokes at her expense that the other guests had laughed at uncomfortably. Jennifer had become progressively quieter, seeming to disappear into herself. Exactly the way abuse victims learn to minimize their presence to avoid triggering more violence. But what I hadn't known, what nobody at that dinner except Jennifer herself had known, was that underneath that quiet, intimidated exterior, Jennifer had been executing a plan she'd spent 2 years developing with meticulous intelligence. She'd been documenting every instance of Marcus's abuse with the precision of a criminal investigator, collecting evidence that would eventually free her and ensure Marcus faced legal consequences for what he'd done to her. The crisis that would reveal Jennifer's hidden intelligence had come about an hour into the dinner, when Marcus had suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. Heart attack? I'd recognized the signs immediately from my emergency response training. The other dinner guests had panicked. Someone had called 911. And I'd moved in to provide first aid while we waited for paramedics. That's when Jennifer had done something that had surprised everyone in that dining room. Instead of the helpless panic you might expect from someone who'd been portrayed as stupid all evening, she'd calmly pulled out her phone and started recording, documenting Marcus's medical emergency. The 911 call, the response from restaurant staff and paramedics. Her demeanor had been completely different from the intimidated woman we'd seen earlier. Focused, methodical, purposeful. "Ma'am, you should probably put your phone away," one of the other dinner guests had suggested. "Your husband is having a medical emergency." "I know exactly what's happening," Jennifer had replied, her voice steady and clear. Nothing like the quiet, uncertain tone she'd used earlier when Marcus was conscious. And I'm documenting it because when Marcus wakes up, he's just going to claim this heart attack was somehow my fault and use it as another excuse to hurt me. So I'm recording everything that happens tonight to prove exactly what occurred. The paramedics had arrived within 8 minutes and had stabilized Marcus, loading him into the ambulance for transport to Denver Health Medical Center. One of the paramedics had asked Jennifer routine questions about Marcus's medical history, medications, any prior heart conditions. And Jennifer had pulled out a detailed medical file from her purse, comprehensive records of Marcus' health issues. Medications, family history, organized with professional precision. He has hypertension, takes lisinopril 20 milligrams daily, family history of cardiac disease. Had warning signs of angina over the past 3 months that he ignored. Jennifer had recited from her documentation. I've been tracking his symptoms and trying to get him to see a cardiologist, but he refused because he said I was too stupid to understand medical issues. The lead paramedic had looked impressed. "This is extremely helpful information. You've documented everything we'd need to know for his treatment. Most spouses don't have this level of detail readily available." "I document everything," Jennifer had said simply. "For the past 2 years, I've documented every aspect of my life with Marcus. Every time he hit me, I documented it with photos and medical records. Every time he screamed at me or called me stupid, I recorded it. Every financial transaction, every threat, every instance of him isolating me from my family, all documented. Tonight's heart attack is just one more piece of evidence in a very comprehensive file. The recognition on everyone, just the realization that the stupid wife Marcus had been humiliating all evening, was actually incredibly intelligent and had been systematically building a case against him, had been profound. One of the other couples had been Marcus's business partners, and their expressions suggested they were reassessing everything they thought they knew about Jennifer and Marcus's marriage. After Marcus had been transported to the hospital, Jennifer had stayed at the restaurant to speak with me and the other dinner guests. What she revealed over the next 30 minutes had been a masterclass in survival, intelligence, and strategic planning that would have impressed criminal investigators. I'd been married to Marcus for 8 years, Jennifer had explained, her voice now carrying confidence that seemed impossible to reconcile with the intimidated woman from earlier. For 6 of those years, he's been abusive, physically violent, emotionally cruel, financially controlling, socially isolating. He made me quit my job, cut off contact with my family, convinced me I was too stupid to function without him. He told me constantly that I was incompetent, that I'd never survive if I left him, that no one would believe me if I reported his abuse. So 2 years ago, I started collecting evidence, Jennifer had continued. Every time he hit me, I took photos, clear images showing bruises, injuries, with timestamps and location data embedded in the digital files. Every time he screamed at me or threatened me, I made audio recordings on my phone. I documented every financial transaction showing how he controlled all our money. I saved every email and text message where he belittled me or made threats. I kept detailed journals of every incident with dates, times, witnesses when available. I also documented his medical issues, Jennifer added, because I knew that when I finally left him, he'd probably have some kind of health crisis from the stress and rage, and he'd try to blame me for it. So I tracked his blood pressure, his symptoms, his refusal to seek medical care despite clear warning signs. Tonight, when he has his heart attack, I have comprehensive proof that it was caused by his own poor health choices and rage, not by anything I did to him. The intelligence and foresight Jennifer had demonstrated in her evidence collection had been remarkable. She'd essentially conducted a 2-year criminal investigation into her own abuse, anticipating the legal challenges she'd face when leaving and systematically building documentation to overcome every objection Marcus or his lawyers might raise. Why didn't you just leave earlier? One of the dinner guests had asked the kind of question people who've never experienced abuse often ask without understanding the complexity. Because leaving is the most dangerous time for abuse victims. Jennifer had replied with patience that suggested she'd answered this question before. Most women who are killed by abusive partners are killed when they try to leave. Marcus had made clear threats about what he'd do if I ever left him. He controlled all our finances, so I had no money to leave. He'd isolated me from family and friends who might have helped me escape. And I knew that if I left without rock-solid evidence of his abuse, he'd use the court system to destroy me, claim I was crazy. Take everything we owned, maybe even get custody of future children if we'd had kids. So I waited, Jennifer had explained. I collected evidence methodically for 2 years while pretending to be the stupid, obedient wife Marcus thought he'd broken. I let him think his abuse was working, that I believed I was incompetent and worthless. Meanwhile, I was building a case so comprehensive that when I finally filed for divorce and a restraining order, no judge would doubt that Marcus was dangerous and abusive. Tonight was supposed to be just another dinner where Marcus humiliated me in front of his business partners. Jennifer had concluded, but his heart attack accelerated my timeline. When he's released from the hospital, I won't be there. I'll be filing for divorce with 2 years of documented evidence, applying for a restraining order with proof of his violence, and ensuring that Marcus Brennan faces legal consequences for what he's done to me. And that's exactly what had happened. While Marcus had been recovering in the hospital, Jennifer had filed for divorce, obtained an emergency restraining order, and provided law enforcement with her comprehensive evidence of years of abuse. Marcus had been arrested when released from the hospital, charged with multiple counts of domestic violence, assault, and criminal threats. The evidence Jennifer had collected had been so overwhelming that Marcus's lawyers had advised him to accept a plea deal rather than go to trial where her documentation would be presented to a jury. Jennifer Brennan's case is one of the most professionally documented domestic violence cases I've ever prosecuted. The Denver district attorney had commented during a press conference. She collected 2 years of evidence with precision that rivaled trained investigators. Photographs with forensic metadata, audio recordings that were legally obtained, financial records showing economic abuse, medical documentation, witness statements. Her intelligence and planning ensured that her abuser couldn't use the court system to continue controlling her, which unfortunately happens to many abuse victims who leave without adequate evidence. The story had generated substantial media attention because Jennifer's methodical evidence collection had been so exceptional. Domestic violence advocates had used her case as a teaching example, both celebrating her intelligence in documenting abuse and emphasizing that not all victims have the resources or circumstances to collect evidence safely. Jennifer's story shows that abuse victims are not weak or stupid, one advocate had explained. Often they're incredibly intelligent people executing complex survival strategies under dangerous conditions. But we need to be careful not to set Jennifer's case as the standard all victims must meet. Not everyone can safely document abuse for years. And lack of physical evidence doesn't mean abuse didn't happen. Jennifer's intelligence saved her. But we need systems that protect all victims regardless of their ability to collect evidence. Jennifer had rebuilt her life after escaping Marcus, starting over with a courage that had been inspiring to witness. She'd reconnected with family he'd forced her to cut off, started working again in the field she'd left when Marcus had made her quit, and become an advocate helping other abuse victims plan safe exits and understand their legal options. For 8 years, everyone thought I was stupid, Jennifer had said during an interview about her experience. Marcus told me constantly that I was incompetent, that I couldn't function without him, that no one would believe me if I reported his abuse. His friends and business partners saw me being quiet and intimidated, and they assumed that as just who I was, a stupid woman who could even set a table correctly. But I was never stupid. Jennifer had continued. I was surviving. I was waiting. I was collecting evidence with intelligence and patience that eventually freed me and ensured Marcus faced consequences. People mistook my survival strategy for lack of intelligence, when actually executing that strategy over 2 years required more intelligence than most people will ever need to demonstrate. And sitting here now in my living room, having just told you all both Khalil's story and Jennifer's story, I want to make sure you understand why I'm sharing these particular experiences together. Because they read both about people whose intelligence was invisible to everyone around them because of assumptions about their current circumstances. Khalil was invisible because he was a janitor with an accent. And people assumed janitors couldn't possibly understand neurosurgery. Jennifer was invisible because she was an abuse victim playing the role her abuser had assigned her. And people assumed her quiet, intimidated demeanor meant she was actually as stupid as her husband claimed. But both of them were using extraordinary intelligence in their survival. Khalil, maintaining his medical knowledge through 6 years of cleaning toilets, while trying to navigate impossible licensing barriers. Jennifer collecting evidence through 2 years of abuse while pretending to be the broken woman her husband thought he decreated. And here's what I need y'all to understand, especially you young folks who are still figuring out the world. Intelligence comes in forms that diplomas don't measure and that conventional success doesn't capture. Sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one everyone guessed dismissing. The janitor with the accent, the quiet woman who seems intimidated, the person doing work that society treats as low status. You can't judge intelligence by someone's current job or their current circumstances, or whether they went to college, or how they present themselves in situations designed to intimidate them. Real intelligence often hides in plain sight, invisible to everyone except the people who know to look past surface appearances and recognize capability that circumstances have forced underground. Oh, I can see some of y'all are getting over there. Sarah, you okay, honey? I know you've been through some rough stuff in your past relationships, and stories like Jennifer's can hit hard when you've been there yourself. Come here. Let Uncle Sam give you a hug. Pauses for emotional moment. All right, now it's getting late and some of y'all have work tomorrow. Let Des call those kids back in here and maybe have some dessert to end the evening on a lighter note. But before we do, let me just say, if you ever find yourself in a situation like Jennifer's, or if you know someone who is, please remember that intelligence comes in survival forms. Document what you can safely document. Reach out for help when you can safely reach out. And know that being in that situation doesn't mean you re-weak or stupid. Often it means you re-incredibly strong and smart, just waiting for the right moment to escape. And that National Domestic Violence Hotline number I mentioned earlier, 1-800-7997-233. Keep that somewhere safe if you or anyone you know might need it. They're good people who understand this stuff way better than Uncle Sam does. Now, who wants pie? I think Marcus's mom brought that amazing apple pie she makes, and I'd hate to let it go to waste.